The morning sun had barely broken through the mist when a group of aviation enthusiasts pulled up to the edge of an abandoned airfield. The cracked runway stretched endlessly before them, half buried under wild grass and creeping vines. Nature had long since claimed this forgotten place. Birds perched on broken light poles, and the wind carried a faint whistle through the shattered control tower windows. For years, rumors had circulated in aviation forums about a rare prototype aircraft hidden somewhere in this region, an experimental jet built in the 1960s for an airline that vanished before it ever took flight. Many believed it was just a myth, a story told by old mechanics and collectors chasing legends. But today, that myth was about to become reality. The team, 5 men and 2 women, had traveled hundreds of miles, guided only by a few blurred photographs and coordinates passed around online. Their leader, Daniel, a retired pilot, had spent months researching archives and flight logs. He believed the aircraft was real, left behind after the company collapsed. For him, this was not just a hunt, it was a personal mission. As they moved deeper into the overgrown airfield, the crunch of broken glass and gravel echoed under their boots. Faded warning signs still hung on rusted fences. Authorized personnel only. The once bustling hangars now stood silent, their massive doors jammed halfway open, revealing only shadows inside. "Over here," shouted Maya, one of the younger members of the crew, pointing toward a hangar hidden behind tall weeds. Its metal siding was corroded and eaten through by rust, the roof partially collapsed. A faint outline of a tail fin could be seen beneath layers of ivy and moss. Daniel's heartbeat quickened. He pushed through the brush, scraping his arms on sharp metal edges. As the group cleared away branches and debris, the shape became clearer, smooth. Elegant curves of an aircraft that didn't belong to any commercial model they'd seen. It was there. A rare 1960s prototype jet. Half buried in dust and memories, the silver fuselage, once polished to mirror perfection, was now stained green with moss. The windows were clouded, some shattered completely. The landing gear had sunk deep into the cracked floor, and the tires were deflated to flat rubber discs. One wing drooped at a strange angle, its tip torn open by years of corrosion. Yet despite all the damage, something about the aircraft still radiated beauty, an aura of pride and forgotten dreams. Maya wiped the grime from the nose of the jet and gasped. "Look, there's still paint under here." Under the dirt and decay, faint traces of a logo emerged, a stylized bird with spread wings, painted in blue and gold. It was the insignia of Aerostar Airways, a small airline that existed only briefly in the 1960s before mysteriously shutting down. Daniel knelt beside the fuselage, running his hand across the metal. "Aerostar, I can't believe it," he whispered. "They only built 2 prototypes of this jet. The other one was destroyed in a test flight. This is the last one." The rest of the team stood in silent awe. For a moment, the airfield seemed to hold its breath. Dust floated lazily through shafts of sunlight pouring through holes in the roof. The wind rustled through the grass outside, as if the world itself was watching. Cameron, the team's engineer, stepped forward with his flashlight and peered into the cockpit through a broken window. "It's all still here," he murmured. "The gauges, the controls, even the seats. It's like time just stopped." Inside, the cockpit was a time capsule. Faded leather seats cracked under age, control levers frozen in place, dials covered in a thin layer of dust. On the control yoke, the same blue and gold bird emblem gleamed faintly, untouched by rust. "It's incredible," said Maya softly. "All these years, and it's just been sitting here." Daniel smiled, though his voice was filled with emotion. "This isn't just an old airplane. It's a piece of aviation history, an experiment that never got to fly again. If we don't save it now, it'll disappear forever." The group began to circle the plane, documenting every inch with cameras and drones. They examined the engines, the undercarriage, the serial plates, each detail confirming that the aircraft was genuine. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how advanced it had been for its time. Early jet engine design, composite materials, a sleek aerodynamic structure years ahead of its competitors. As the afternoon sun climbed higher, Beams of light illuminated the worn body of the aircraft, like a spotlight on a forgotten stage. The team worked silently, brushing away dirt and vines, revealing panels engraved with numbers and handwritten notes from long-gone engineers. It felt like resurrecting a ghost. Daniel stood at the nose again, his eyes reflecting the dull shine of the metal. "We're not leaving this here," he said firmly. "We're going to restore it. No matter how long it takes," Cameron laughed softly. "You mean bring this wreck back to life? That'll take years." Daniel looked back at the team. "Then we'd better start today." The others exchanged glances, half disbelief, half excitement. There was something contagious about Daniel's determination. In that single moment, the overgrown airfield no longer felt abandoned. It felt alive again, buzzing with the spirit of those who once built dreams from steel and sky. As the sun dipped low and painted the scene in shades of orange and gold, the group packed up their gear. Before leaving, Daniel turned one last time to the aircraft resting quietly under the fading light. "Sleep well, old bird," he whispered. "We'll be back for you." The wind carried his words across the empty runway. The forgotten jet sat in silence. Its story paused, not ended. For the first time in decades, there was hope that it would fly again. The first day of the restoration felt less like a project and more like a rescue mission. The team stood before the jet once again, their eyes filled with both awe and apprehension. Under the dull light of a cloudy morning, the aircraft seemed more fragile than they remembered. The silver fuselage was dented and streaked with rust, the engines silent like sleeping beasts. But Daniel, the team leader, wasn't deterred. He placed his hand on the cold metal and whispered, "Let's bring her back." They began with the basics, clearing the decades of decay. Old vines wrapped around the landing gear like chains, and mud had hardened in every crevice. The team spent hours scraping, brushing, and washing. The smell of old oil and damp earth filled the hangar as they worked. Every screw they loosened revealed another problem: corroded pipes, cracked panels, and tangled wiring that looked more like a bird's nest than a flight system. Inside the cockpit, Maya and Cameron worked side by side. The controls were fused in place, and the instruments were clouded with grime. She carefully removed the cracked glass covers, labeling each gauge and dial before placing it on a workbench. "Look at this craftsmanship," Maya murmured, wiping away dirt to reveal brass lettering beneath. "They built everything by hand back then." Cameron smiled faintly. "Yeah, and now it's our turn to rebuild it by hand too." The team quickly realized the scale of the challenge ahead. Replacement parts for a 1960s prototype jet didn't exist. They couldn't just order them online. Every nut, every valve, every wire had to be either restored, 3D printed, or salvaged from scrapyards across the world. Weeks turned into months. The hangar transformed from a graveyard into a workshop. Old toolboxes lined the walls. A generator hummed in the corner, and the air was thick with the scent of metal polish and engine oil. They worked long into the night under flickering fluorescent lights, hands blistered and uniforms stained with grease. Daniel handled the logistics, calling aviation museums, collectors and scrapyard owners for help. Some laughed at his request. Others admired his determination and sent parts for free, writing messages like, "For the dreamers who still believe in flight." One evening, as the sun dipped low, the team gathered around the exposed engine bay. Cameron had just removed one of the massive turbine covers. Inside, the components were fused solid, years of rust turning them into a single block of metal. "This engine's a mess," he said, frustration in his tone. "We might need a miracle," Daniel grinned. "Good thing we brought one." He pointed to the old maintenance manual they'd recovered from a retired mechanic weeks earlier, the only surviving copy. Its pages were yellowed and torn, but it held the secrets they needed. They worked in shifts, documenting every nut and bolt, carefully rebuilding what time had destroyed. Some nights they slept on cots inside the hangar, refusing to leave the plane unattended. Rain leaked through the roof, dripping onto toolboxes and blueprints, but no one complained. Maya, often the last to leave, would sit inside the cockpit long after the others had gone. She'd stare at the lifeless gauges, imagining what it must have been like decades ago, when the pilots sat here, Engines roaring, skies waiting. After 6 months, progress began to show. The wings were cleaned and sealed, the hydraulic systems replaced, and the landing gear restored to working condition. The team even managed to repaint parts of the fuselage, revealing its original shine beneath layers of decay. The blue and gold Aerostar logo gleamed again, catching the sunlight for the first time in 50 years. But the hardest challenge still awaited: the engines. The heart of the aircraft had not turned in decades. When Cameron finally reassembled one of the 2 massive turbines, it was a gamble. Every calculation, every component had to be perfect. A single mistake could end the entire restoration. They set up safety barriers, double-checked wiring, and prepared fire extinguishers, just in case. Daniel stood beside the cockpit, headset on, his hands trembling slightly. "All right, everyone, this is it. Let's see if she still has a heartbeat." The hangar went silent. Cameron turned the master switch. A low hum filled the air, weak at first, then stronger. The team held their breath. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint cough came from the engine, followed by a deep rumble. Smoke burst from the exhaust as the turbine slowly began to spin. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean, but it moved. A cheer erupted inside the hangar. Maya covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Cameron laughed like a child, his voice echoing off the walls. Daniel looked up at the roaring machine and whispered, "Welcome back." The test lasted only a few seconds before the engine shut down again, coughing and wheezing into silence. But it was enough. That short, trembling roar meant everything. For the first time, the aircraft had come alive again. Over the following weeks, their motivation skyrocketed. Every night, the hangar glowed with light and noise as they continued repairs. The sound of drills, the clatter of tools, the buzz of welding torches, it all became music to their ears. Slowly, the impossible began to feel achievable. They were no longer restoring a machine. They were reviving a memory, resurrecting the dream of the engineers who built it half a century ago. And though exhaustion hung heavy in their bodies, one thing kept them going. The vision of that day when the rare Aerostar jet would roll down the runway again, its engines roaring proudly against the sky that had long forgotten it. The restoration had truly begun, and the world was about to witness a miracle in metal. Months slipped by like sand through fingers. What had begun with excitement and hope was now turning into an exhausting uphill battle. The team's hangar had become both their home and their prison. Tools lay scattered across workbenches, blueprints curled at the edges, and half-finished parts sat forgotten under dusty tarps. Outside, rain poured endlessly, seeping through holes in the roof and soaking everything beneath. The air smelled of rust, damp wood, and weary determination. Daniel sat alone one night, staring at the aircraft through the dim glow of a single hanging bulb. The once promising restoration now seemed like an impossible dream. The team's savings were nearly gone, every paycheck spent on tools, parts, and paint that barely made a difference. Sponsorships that had once seemed promising had backed out, calling the project too costly, too unrealistic. The Aerostar jet stood silent once more. As if mocking them, Cameron kicked a wrench across the floor. "We're wasting our time," he said bitterly. "We've done everything we can. Without new parts, she'll never fly again." Maya looked up from her workbench, eyes tired but still burning with quiet defiance. "You said the same thing about the engine," she reminded him. "And we brought that back to life." "Yeah," Cameron muttered, "but the rest of it's falling apart faster than we can fix it." Daniel ran a hand through his graying hair and exhaled. "We didn't come this far to give up now. We'll find a way." But deep down he was afraid. The costs were mounting. The team was exhausted. And the jet, their beautiful, rare 1960s miracle, seemed to be slipping away from them once again. Then, one stormy afternoon, a visitor arrived. A pickup truck rolled to a stop outside the hangar gates, its tires splashing through muddy puddles. An elderly man stepped out, wearing a worn leather jacket and carrying a heavy briefcase. His eyes scanned the hangar, landing on the jet with a look that mixed nostalgia and sadness. Daniel approached cautiously. "Can I help you, sir?" The man smiled faintly. "You already are," he said. I'm Arthur Hayes. I used to work for Aerostar Airways 50 years ago. The name hit Daniel like thunder. Aerostar's original mechanics were legends among enthusiasts, and most had long since passed away. You worked on this aircraft? Daniel asked, stunned. Arthur nodded, running his hand along the fuselage. I helped assemble her wings. She was supposed to be the future of commercial flight. We called her the Aerostar Phoenix. The team gathered around, listening in silent awe as Arthur opened his briefcase. Inside, wrapped in protective cloth, was a thick, leather-bound binder, its cover embossed with the faded logo of Aerostar Airways. This, Arthur said, setting it down gently, is the original flight manual, the last one in existence. Daniel's breath caught. The manual wasn't just a book. It was the blueprint of the entire aircraft, containing every circuit, wire, and control system. It was the one thing they'd been missing. That evening, the hangar came alive again. Arthur spread the manual across a table, the yellowed pages filled with handwritten notes and diagrams. He explained how the electrical systems were wired, how the engines synchronized, and even the purpose of hidden access panels the team hadn't known existed. See this lever? Arthur pointed to a photo in the manual. That's not a fuel release, it's a manual pressure equalizer. You've got it locked in the wrong position. That's why your hydraulics keep failing. Cameron blinked in disbelief. We've been fighting that problem for weeks, Arthur chuckled. Sometimes you just have to listen to the old ghosts of the machine. Over the following weeks, Arthur became part of the team. Despite his age, he worked with the energy of a man half his years. His hands were steady, his memory sharp. He knew the aircraft like it was part of his own soul. Under his guidance, systems that had defied repair for months began to respond. Wires were rerouted, valves replaced, and panels adjusted according to the original specifications. The cockpit, once a dead maze of switches, slowly came back to life. One night, Maya flipped a main power switch, and for the first time, the entire instrument panel lit up. The gauges glowed softly, the dials flickered, and the faint hum of life filled the cabin. Everyone froze, staring in disbelief. It's working, she whispered. It's really working. Arthur smiled, his eyes reflecting the warm orange glow. She's remembering who she is. But the struggle wasn't over. With each success came new challenges. Broken fuel lines, outdated electrical circuits, and the constant threat of running out of money. Daniel had to sell his car just to pay for the next shipment of materials. Still, the team pressed on. They shared meals on toolboxes, laughed through exhaustion, and refused to let go of the dream. On one particularly cold night, the rain poured so hard that water began dripping onto the cockpit. The team scrambled to cover the plane with tarps, soaking themselves in the process. When the storm finally passed, Arthur stood beside Daniel, watching the rainwater run off the restored wings. She's survived worse, Arthur said quietly. And so have we, Daniel nodded. You think she'll fly again? Arthur looked up at the shadowed outline of the jet. I know she will. Machines like this, they only die when people forget them. And you haven't. By the end of that month, something had shifted. The despair that once hung over the team was replaced by steady confidence. They weren't chasing a fantasy anymore. They were rebuilding history. Every lever, every switch, every gauge that came to life was a victory. And as the old mechanic watched the younger generation work tirelessly to restore what he once built, his eyes filled with quiet pride. The Aerostar Phoenix was no longer just a broken relic of the past. It was beating again, one spark, one bolt, one dream at a time. The day dawned clear and golden, the kind of morning that seemed made for miracles. For the first time in decades, the old airfield wasn't silent. It buzzed with life. The hum of generators, the shuffle of camera crews, the murmur of onlookers who had gathered to witness history. The Aerostar Phoenix, once a forgotten relic, now stood proudly at the center of the runway. Her fuselage gleamed under the rising sun, polished to a mirror finish. The blue and gold logo, once faded and forgotten, shone brightly on her tail. She looked reborn, like a phoenix rising from its ashes. Daniel stood beside the aircraft, staring up at her in disbelief. His hands trembled as he adjusted his headset, still not fully able to process that the day had finally come. After years of work, endless nights, failures and sacrifices, it was all leading to this moment. Behind him, the team prepared for the test flight. Maya checked the control panels one last time, her hands steady, but her heart racing. Cameron stood near the rear of the aircraft, inspecting the landing gear. And Arthur, the old mechanic, stood quietly with his cap in hand, eyes glistening with emotion. "This is it," Daniel said softly. "She's ready," Arthur smiled faintly. "Aye, let's see if the old girl remembers how to fly." The small crowd gathered behind the safety barriers. Local reporters, aviation enthusiasts, and former Aerostar employees who had traveled miles just to see her take off one last time. Some held vintage photographs of the aircraft in her early days. Others simply stood in awe, whispering prayers under their breath. Daniel climbed into the cockpit, every sound amplified by adrenaline. The seat creaked softly under his weight. The switches, levers, and dials, once lifeless, now glowed faintly, alive with energy. He ran his hand across the flight controls and whispered, "Let's make history." Maya sat beside him, running through the pre-flight checklist. Her voice was calm but firm. Battery, on fuel pressure, nominal, hydraulics, green, engine 1, ready, engine 2, ready. Outside, Cameron gave a thumbs up. "Everything's clear." Daniel took a deep breath. "All right, starting engine 1. The hangar trembled as the first engine ignited with a deep, thunderous roar. A cloud of smoke burst from the exhaust before clearing to reveal the faint shimmer of heat waves. The second engine followed, its turbine spinning faster, louder, until the airfield was filled with the sound of raw power, the kind of sound that makes your chest vibrate and your heart race. The crowd gasped. Some clapped, others cried. Arthur watched from the sidelines, tears rolling freely down his weathered cheeks. He whispered to himself, "Welcome back, my girl." The radio crackled. "Runway clear. You are cleared for taxi and takeoff." Daniel's hands tightened around the control column. The Aerostar Phoenix began to move, slowly at first, her wheels creaking against the tarmac. The sound of rubber rolling on concrete was oddly beautiful, like the rhythm of a heartbeat returning after years of silence. Maya looked at the instruments. "Everything's in the green." "She's holding steady," Daniel smiled. "Then let's fly!" He advanced the throttles. The engines roared louder, shaking the ground beneath them. The aircraft picked up speed, accelerating down the runway. The team and crowd watched in breathless silence as the silver jet raced past, faster, faster, until the heat shimmered around her wings. At 100 knots, Daniel felt the nose lift. At 120, the tires left the ground, and then she flew. The moment was electric. The crowd erupted in cheers, cameras flashing, voices echoing across the empty fields. For a second, time seemed to stop. The Aerostar Phoenix climbed gracefully into the morning sky, sunlight glinting off her polished wings. Inside the cockpit, Daniel's eyes filled with tears. "She's flying. She's really flying." Maya laughed through tears, gripping the control panel. After all this time, she remembered. Below, Arthur looked up, his hands trembling as he removed his cap and held it to his chest. "There she goes," he whispered. "The last bird of Aerostar. Free again." At 3,000 feet, the aircraft leveled out. Daniel guided her gently through a turn, the controls smooth and responsive, as if the plane had been waiting for this day as much as they had. The sound of the engines was steady and proud, a song of triumph echoing across the skies. "Everything's perfect," Maya said, scanning the gauges. "No pressure drops, no faults." Daniel smiled, the wind howling softly against the glass. "She's not just flying, she's alive." They circled the airfield twice, each pass greeted by cheers from the ground below. The sunlight reflected off the wings like liquid gold, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause to honor what they had achieved, the rebirth of something that history had long forgotten. After 20 glorious minutes, it was time to land. Daniel guided the Phoenix back toward the runway, every movement slow and precise. The landing gear extended with a reassuring clunk, the runway stretching ahead like a welcome home. "Easy," Maya murmured. The wheels touched down smoothly. A puff of smoke rose as the tires kissed the tarmac. The engines roared one last time before Daniel throttled them down, bringing the aircraft to a gentle stop. Silence. Then, thunderous applause. The entire airfield erupted. People shouted, cheered, and cried all at once. The old jet had done the impossible. Daniel and Maya climbed out of the cockpit to find the team running toward them. Cameron was laughing uncontrollably. Maya hugged Arthur, and Daniel, usually stoic, dropped to his knees, overcome with emotion. Arthur placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've done what we couldn't, son. You gave her a second life." Daniel looked up at the shining aircraft, her wings reflecting the orange glow of sunset. "No," he said softly. "We did." The Phoenix stood tall, gleaming in the dying light. The once-forgotten plane had conquered time, decay, and despair, and in doing so, had united generations of dreamers. As the crowd dispersed and the sky turned crimson, Daniel turned to Maya and smiled. "Ready to take her up again tomorrow?" She grinned. "You couldn't stop me if you tried." Above them, the last light of day glinted off the aircraft's wings, a symbol of hope, resilience, and the undying human spirit that refuses to let history fade away. The Aerostar Phoenix was no longer abandoned. She was reborn, and once again, she belonged to the sky.